Hello, my name is Karen Herrick from Harlequin Arts. I'm a freelance artist and for a long time I have journalled through stitch. It's where I find sanctuary and a greater connection with God our Creator. In my job I create connections too through creativity, and I work in health and social care, in education and in the community, and I run retreats and quiet days across the country. Now, at the beginning of lockdown, when many of us were struggling to get to grips with the reality of the global situation, I initiated a stitched patchwork prayer project as a way to encourage a prayerful focus on the positives of lockdown and as a gesture of solidarity with others around the world affected by the situation. The idea is to help others to pray creatively through the medium of stitch, and for these prayer patches to be sent to me to be stitched together to create a quilt of blessings as a witness to our communities. It's a project to share our hope as Christians with others in a creative way. It's hoped that the quilt will eventually be displayed at next year's spring harvest and other places around the UK. Now, this project was launched on the Spring Harvest at Home YouTube channel as an adaptation of a workshop I should have been running at Harrogate this year. And since then, I've received a number of beautiful and heartfelt stitched prayers through the post from all over the country. It would be really wonderful if you could get involved too. It takes a lot of patches to make a quilt. Maybe get other creative friends in your church to join in too. So stitching can help us to pray through the colours, the textures and the slow stitching. We can be still to draw closer to God. You don't have to be greatly skilled in sewing to have a go. The process is much more important than the end product. So these are some that we've received so far. You don't have to be fantastic at stitching. You could just sew bits and pieces on the fabric that means something to you, that are a blessing for you, that are symbols. So those are two. There's two more. Some are they're very different, as you can see. You don't have to be a quilter. You could be. But you could just simply sew bands of ribbon on, for instance, or stitch some words of blessing. You could use a sewing machine or not. You could hand stitch. I like to hand stitch because it helps me to pray these beautiful words: true, noble, right, pure, lovely, excellent, praiseworthy. Some wonderful stitching there. Prayer for healing, for stillness. So these several came from the same place, or you could perhaps involve everybody in the family. You could use pipe cleaners, you can use patches, whatever is your prayer, however you like to do it, it's up to you. Whatever you've got to hand you can use. So some fantastic prayerful patches that are here. This is the one that I used to show people how to stitch. So this is what I'm going to show on the video next, of how to make the session, and then I'm going to give you a little reflection as well to still you into stitch. So what do you think? Will you join us in stitching prayers of hope and blessing for our world? I'd love it if you could. Thank you. Stitching really helps me to pray. It's through the colours and the textures that something may come to my attention. It's a way that quietens me, a way that stills me to listen, a way that enables me to connect creatively with God. And my prayer is it can do the same for us all. It's for all levels of creativity. All are welcomed, whether you're an experienced creative or you've never picked up a needle and thread since secondary school. What do you think? Is it something you might be interested in? Let's move to the studio for some practical guidelines now. I'm going to go through all the practical things first, and then at the end leave you with a reflection to start you off on your creative prayer stitching adventure.
So if we're going to use these stitch squares of solidarity, these prayerful stitch blessings to create a quilt of hope and trust in God, then we're going to need some squares of fabric, and they'll all need to be the same size. These prayerful stitch blessings will need to be about 12 centimetres square for the actual stitch area, with a border of at least 2 centimetres all the way round, because then we can stitch them together. It doesn't matter what colour, but it might help if you have use either cotton or you use calico. If you've not got these, then an old sheet will do. Say colour doesn't really matter. Behind it might be helpful to have some interfacing, or if you've not got that, a bit of felt, or just use 2 pieces of fabric together. It will be much easier to stitch. So, some ideas for your stitching. Your patchwork prayer is about sharing hope with each other, stitching stories about ways we find positive things in this unprecedented time. It's a way of creative praying. So it might contain a word. It might contain a word that's been helpful for you. It might contain a prayer or a Bible passage. Obviously these aren't 12 centimetres square, but it gives you a sort of idea of the things you could do. Please don't use copyrighted words such as song lyrics. It might simply contain coloured patches that represent something for you, some hope for you. These could be symbols or images of small things that are helping you to cope. Maybe a flower, or a leaf, or a bird's nest, or a rainbow, something that you have found helpful in these unprecedented times. The stitch squares could tell you a story in some way. They could be hand-stitched or machine-stitched or a mixture of both. You could use buttons, or you could use beads, or you could use sequins, ribbons. Sky's your limit. If you want to be really adventurous, you could use printing or stenciling or fabric crayons or pens, but make sure you iron them according to the instructions, or the paint or the pens. You can use whatever technique you like, but just make sure that the material's not too thick. Otherwise, if we do stitch them together, it'll be very difficult. And please, in these times, be mindful of the times and wash your hands before you stitch, and probably keep your clean stitching in a bag in between sewing. Thank you. If you'd like to participate, that's wonderful. But remember, it's not the techniques or how complicated your design is that's important. It doesn't have to be a fancy work of art. It's the prayerful stitching that's really important. It could be very simple. It could just be one word. Whatever it is, let God speak to you through the creative process. Don't decide how your finished stitched prayer is going to look before you begin, but let it grow just as your thoughts expand and your prayers expand, and God meets you in your need. So once you have your piece of fabric for the base, take a little time to look at any fabrics and threads that you have available to you before selecting some that might appeal. Cut and arrange any pieces of chosen fabric onto the background fabric and lay or pin them down to secure. There are no rules here. You can sew paper and plastic, scrunch or tear fabrics, scribble over it, layer sheer fabrics, whatever you want. It doesn't have to be a picture. It could just be blocks of colour that mean something to you for your prayer. So as you can see, I'm just beginning to lay things down. I'm making sure that I keep it into the 12 centimetre square so that I can see what there is. I've just made myself a little frame to hold things together. I quite like that. I'm using pastel colours here because for me slowing down has been a big thing of this time. We're all having to slow down, and that's why I'm using pastel colours. And I've also got the sunshine here because amidst it all there is hope. I think I quite like that. I'm going to leave that and just put everything else to the side. See, it doesn't have to be a picture, but it just has to mean something for you in your prayer. Just remember to use the quiet to allow God to speak to you as you create. Once you're happy with that, you could start to add in embellishments. What I'd do is stitch those down, and then I'd sort of start to think adding embellishments, maybe some buttons, maybe some sequins, maybe a stitched word I'd probably put in there. I'd probably put slow down, maybe around the sunshine, and put some rays. But it's entirely up to you what you do. Everybody's experience is different here. Jot things down that come to you. If there's anything difficult or exciting, maybe make some time later in the week to pray through it. And once you've completed your prayer, sit back and look at the image you've created. Give yourself time to ask, what has God been saying to me? This is something that I did at a different time. And dwell on that. So I'm going to do a little reflection for you now to lead you into reflective prayer for your stitched prayer. We are called to pray for each other, our communities and our world. We are called to bless others by our actions. We're called to faith in a God who promises to provide. We are asked to be positive and trust that God Almighty can give us all we need for each day. It's not easy in these uncertain times when many of us have lost sources of income and the certainty of our daily patterns of living. It is not easy when our communities, countries and world governments have no solid answers. It is not easy when we are physically isolated from those we know and love, and daily living shifts like desert sands in the winds of uncertainty. It's easier to trust God in the good times, but we're faced now with such insecurity that surely in such times as this, there is nowhere else to go but God. The familiar Bible passage in Matthew 6 seems particularly poignant right now, when many of us who have never had to trust God daily for the food we eat have been experiencing anxiety in being able to provide for our families. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? Let's reflect on this passage. Is there a particular part that stands out for you? Talk to God about how you feel. Consider what has helped you in this crisis so far. Solidarity and hope. What solidarity and hope have you seen from others? How have you given it to others? Prayer and blessings. How has prayer been a blessing to you? How have you blessed others and been blessed by other people's small acts of kindness and compassion? Positivity and promise. What small positive things each day have given you hope and helped you to cope? Perhaps a spring sky, a rainbow drawing in a window, the simple joy of there being enough bread on the supermarket shelf when you arrive. What promises in the Bible are you clinging to right now that give you life and light in these dark times? As you consider these things, begin to stitch as you pray, reflecting your thoughts through the colours, textures and thread you are using. Let's together create stitched squares of solidarity for each other. Let them be stitched messages of hope to be shared with each other, to be patchwork prayers and stitched blessings that tell of hope for the future, our faith in God, and shared stories of positivity and promise. For we have a God who stills the storm, parts the sea, provides manna for each day, and has promised to be with us wherever we go. Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. So let's begin to stitch.